Well, a day after firing head coach Jim Montgomery, Bruins GM Don Sweeney addressed his decision on Wednesday, and his focus is quickly shifting to his players.
We were flat all the way through training camp. Whether or not they thought it was going to be easy and the guys that had really good last year, would come out and that it would just fall in place. Again, this league is incredibly humbling if you have that approach to the game, and it'll expose you in a hurry. And that's sort of what's happened to our group.
Very disappointing day. Also very frustrating. This is a reflection of our play, and it was avoidable. And I think that's the tough part about this, is that if we would have done our job in here, he'd still be around.
The bottom line is we're not a hard out right now. We're self-destructing at periods of time. We need to be a harder out, and that's a testament to what the fan base expects.
Right on.
Back again with Pierre LeBrun. So the Bruins fired Jim Montgomery on Tuesday, Pierre. They've lost 5 of 7. At the same time, they're only a game under 500. They're right outside of a wild card spot. But do you get the impression that Cam Neely and Don Sweeney are interested in making more changes other than just behind the bench?
Yeah, I think that's possible. Don Sweeney has been calling around to gauge the market. If this team doesn't get out of this funk and doesn't find that spark under Joe Sacco, I think you will see an attempt to trigger this team with a trade. But I think the coaching move is the first step. And what they hope is that this will get them going. I'll tell you one thing. I think there's a reason why Don Sweeney doesn't do a lot of that many media availabilities, because he's an open book, man. I mean, he does not hold anything back. You literally know everything that's going on in his mind when you ask him a question. I think it's awesome. But he's pretty mad at his team, and he's somewhat mad at himself, too. I mean, he talked about that in his news conference. I mean, Elias Lindholm has not played well. That's a big monster 7-year deal on July 1st that Don Sweeney hoped would fix their number one center hole. He's not looked like a number one center at all. So, and it's interesting because you always have an out as a GM to say, but it is a new team and maybe he needs more time to adjust. What Don Sweeney said on this day was he's had enough time. so he's angry at his players for sure. But I think, too, if this season doesn't turn around, there's no question Don Sweeney would be the first one to tell you, Jay, that some of this is on him. At the end of the day, you're putting the roster together. You're changing the roster. You're making trades. You're making signings. And the Bruins don't look right. They don't look right down the middle. They're not tight enough defensively. They don't score organically. And Jeremy Swayman is struggling after missing training camp. So there's lots for that team internally to improve on, and they hope that comes with Joe Sacco.
I couldn't agree more about Sweeney being so entertaining. I see a media career in his future, Pierre, if he decides at the end, because he's just so fun to hear what he thinks about his team and what's going on. You also wrote this week about potential landing spots for John Gibson. Listen, we've been talking about this for a long time. But now it feels like the Ducks really have a goaltender of the future in Lucas Dostal, even though they are struggling once again. But they've got their goalie of the future. The question is, can they find someone to take Gibson in that big contract? What are some potential landing spots in your mind, Pierre?
Right, and one of the reasons I wrote about this is I think things have shifted a little. You're right. He's been available for more than a year. And for people watching, it's important to understand that the Ducks have been open to moving him, but also John Gibson and his agent have been open to that too. They're working all in concert. They've all been on the same page saying, it's time for me to go somewhere else. And they're doing it in concert. Like there's no tension here in this. What has scared teams away, especially last year, was that there was still a lot of term left on his contract that pays him $6.4 million a year. And listen, now there's 2 more years left on his contract after this year that pays him $6 million. So it's not like that's totally gone away. The difference is the cap is going up meaningfully now every year, as we know. Number 2, top goalies now are signing for $8.5 million a year.
Yep.
Suddenly 6'4", if John Gibson finds himself, it doesn't look terrible. Number 3, I think the Ducks are now ready to eat and retain salary in a John Gibson trade. I don't know if they were ready to do that a year ago. So there's a lot of factors that are leading up to the fact that I think everyone involved is more motivated to see this happen before March 7th. In fact, I know they are. Now the question is, who steps up? And there's a couple of teams in particular that I think are great fits. One is Carolina, one is Colorado. Now, having dug in on this, let's start with the Avalanche. They're 31st in the league in goals against. I don't have to explain that too much. But the Avs, my understanding is, are steadfast in their belief that Alexander Georgiev will turn this around. They point to the fact that he went toe-to-toe with Connor Hellebuck and Jake Ottinger in the playoffs last year. And he did, by the way.
Yep.
The Avs didn't lose out in the second round because of goaltending. And they think they're going to be okay. They insist, for better or for worse, Colorado insists they're not goalie hunting. So that's probably an X when it comes to a possibility for John Gibson, who I think would be perfect there. Carolina is very interesting to me. I know for a fact that John Gibson is on their radar list. Doesn't mean necessarily they'll pick up the phone, but he's a name they've bandied about. Freddie Anderson's out again. They're still evaluating him, but I think it's going to be a couple months at least. And then what's he like when he comes back? So there's some concern there about their depth. I mean, what keeps Eric Tulsky, the GM, up at night, no doubt in my mind, is what happens if Kochetkov gets hurt come playoff time.
Yes.
What do you do if you're Carolina? So I know for a fact the Hurricanes are calling around and examining the goalie market just so they're ready. Whether or not they go after Gibson or another goalie before March 7th remains to be seen. But I love the fit. If John Gibson becomes a $4 million goalie instead of a $6.4 million goalie, I'm telling you, that guy's going to find his A game again on a contender.
And you make such a good point about Carolina. You know, they've always been reluctant to pay goaltenders, right? So if you could, if Anaheim would be willing to eat a little bit of that money, maybe there's a fit there. Alex Ovechkin's chase for Wayne Gretzky's goal record, Pierre, as you know, was going like gangbusters all season, and then Monday night hit a major snag when he was injured in a game against Utah. You talked to Washington GM Chris Patrick last week before the OV injury. Do you get the sense that this team that has started terrifically can weather this storm?
I think so, because honestly, I say this with all due respect to Alex Ovechkin, and the Caps probably can't be quite as honest about this publicly, but one of the encouraging signs of their retool or their on-the-fly rebuild here in Washington is that they're doing it while kind of minimizing what the legacy players, what their place is on that team. Alex Ovechkin is still a big power play guy. He's still a top six guy, don't get me wrong. But it's really making room for a lot of newcomers and youth that has really made this transformation of the Capitals work, right? You look at Connor McMichael. I mean, he's having a great year. The trade for Pierre-Luc Dubois, the trade for Jacob Chikrin, the trade for Logan Thompson. Few teams were more active this offseason on the trade market than the Washington Capitals in the league where everyone says, it's too hard to make trades. Well, Washington made about 6 of them.
Yes.
In about the space of 6 weeks. And, you know, you can tell in talking in my conversation with Chris Patrick that they're really excited about they may have thread the needle here in avoiding this terrible letdown of teams that hang in too long in the cap system and don't want to rebuild. They started this 2 years ago. They've made move after move after move to try and just shift things and get younger on the fly. Man, they look pretty darn good right now.
Boy, do they ever. And Logan Thompson getting a lot of Team Canada Four Nations face-off consideration, at least from our own Kevin Weeks on the show yesterday, Pierre.
Well, I mean, how can I say this without someone has to play goal for Canada?
Right.
I don't know what to tell you. You know, if there's one position where Team Canada management, led by Don Sweeney and Doug Armstrong, wish they could move the deadline from December 2nd to, I don't know, February 10th at midnight, it would be naming their 3 goalies, because that's driving them pretty crazy right now.
I would have to concur. Well, after a tumultuous offseason for Marty Necas, in which he requested a trade, the Canes did not grant that trade. He comes into Wednesday sitting 3rd in the league in points. He's got 30 points. He's having a great season. Is this just an example, Pierre, of maybe trying to work through issues with a disgruntled star player rather than immediately shipping him out when he requests that?
Well, it's certainly an example of the best trades you make are the ones you didn't. I mean, holy jumping. That's chatted with Eric Tulsky this week, the GM of the Hurricanes, and he didn't deny it. I mean, man, are they relieved and thrilled with what ended up happening with Martin Necas. He asked for a trade point blank. Let's not sugarcoat it. And Eric Tulsky didn't sugarcoat it. By the way, it's like Eric Tulsky takes over as GM and Don Waddell. He's like, here's your first task. This guy wants out.
Yeah.
And listen, they ended up talking to 28 NHL teams about Martin Necas.
Wow.
28 out of the 31 teams reached out on him. There were some serious trade offers, Winnipeg among them, Montreal among them. But at the end of the day, you're right. Some real good stick handling here by the Hurricanes, because They convinced him to sign a 2-year deal. Now, it's a 2-year deal, not an 8-year deal, right? So it'll be interesting to see what happens in 2 years when he's UFA. But for the time being, the fact that they didn't trade this guy and they had trade discussion after trade discussion and they were able to keep him, I mean, where would this team be without him right now? 3rd in NHL scoring. It's a pretty amazing story.
Finally, Pierre, on Monday night when the roof literally started falling at Jerry World, did you consider that the highlight of the Dallas Cowboys season so far? Oh, here it is. Oh, yeah. There we go.
It's
somewhere Roger Nielsen
I'm cheering
is
for
very
the draft
proud of
pick. Yeah, I'm cheering for the draft pick. In fact, I saw your hit with Luke Wilson after the game, and Luke Wilson was talking about how that game was actually closer than the score said, and I agree.
Yep.
And I'm not saying that to try to save face for the Cowboys. I want them to lose out, and I was concerned they would actually pull that off for no reason. At this point, there's no reason. I don't know how they can tank that game U.S. Thanksgiving against the Giants. Someone's got to win that game, I guess.
Yes, they do.
But I'm hoping they go 1 and whatever from here on out and finally get the draft high. They never draft high. They're either in the playoffs every year before they lose out early, or they're 8-8. They finally actually draft high, which is the only silver lining of a season completely gone off the rails.
You know what I was thinking, Pierre, as I wrap up with you? We have the NFL draft on this network, and we often send, our football guys, our great guys, Dave Naylor and Davis Sanchez, but I see no reason why a capable reporter such as yourself couldn't be there as the Cowboys select 1st overall, ready to interview your newest Dallas star.
Well, I think I should be sitting beside Jerry Jones and telling him who not to draft. I mean, like the time someone convinced him not to take Johnny Manziel, that's when they drafted Zach Martin. Thank goodness. But yeah, exactly.
Okay, all right. We'll try to work out you sitting next to Jerry. But either way, we love having you on the show. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week. Okay. When we return, the On Rights and Wrongs.